Welcome to Insider Events, HR Innovation and Prioritizing People, presented by Workplace from Facebook. Here's our host, Insider Leadership Editor, Brandon T. Harden.
Hi, I'm Brandon T. Harden, Leadership Editor here at Insider. It's an honor to be your host for today's event, HR Innovation and Prioritizing People, presented by Workplace from Facebook. The coronavirus pandemic has changed the workplace. In many cases, the office has become the spare bedroom, the kitchen, and even the basement. And for many, a new sense of humanity and empathy has made its way to our workspaces. Our intention for this event is to give you more insight about the evolution of work and how technology is driving that change. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation. Please share your thoughts about today's panels by using the hashtag #InsiderEvents. And you can ask our panelists questions by using the dashboard at the bottom of your screen. We love your feedback. And now I'm delighted to introduce our first session. Work models continue to blur the line between home and personal life. Work from home can turn into back-to-back meetings, which might lead to burnout. That's why HR leaders have started to prioritize workers' physical and mental health. Insider senior correspondent Rebecca Knight, who covers careers in the workplace, is leading a conversation on worker well-being. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Brandon. Welcome to our Insider conversation on HR innovation, focusing on worker well-being. I'm Rebecca Knight. Research shows that a healthier, happier workforce drives business growth, productivity, and engagement. But as the coronavirus pandemic drags on, the American workforce is feeling weary and burnt out. At a time when companies are struggling to recruit and retain workers, this is an important issue for employers. Today, we are going to talk about how HR leaders can prioritize people's well-being. How can they build compassionate company cultures? What kinds of health benefits can they offer to nurture employee wellness? And what can individual managers do to support their employees now and in the future? We have two experts here today with us to help us talk through these issues. I'd like to first welcome Liz Fossleen. She is the author of the book, No Hard Feelings, which is about emotions in the workplace. She's also an expert at Humu, which helps managers create and implement personalized action plans for their employees. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I also want to welcome to the program Shanna Tiayon. She is the founder and chief practitioner at Wellbeing Works, which supports employee well-being through corporate research, trainings, and corporate strategy development. Welcome, Shanna.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So it has been a harrowing 19 months for all of us. Shanna, I wonder if you could set the scene for us and just talk a little bit about where we are now, what you're seeing and hearing from your clients in terms of the challenges that people are facing in the workplace.
Absolutely. I can bring in a mix of what I'm hearing from my clients as well as what the research shows. And so what we know for sure is that over these past 18 months, we have seen a rise in the rates of anxiety and depressive symptoms. We have seen employees trying to cope with the pandemic through increased alcohol use, also eating, obsessive eating to try to cope with the stress from the experience. And there are particular groups who are feeling this more acutely. The research shows, for example, that younger generations in that sort of 18 to 29 category, likely your junior or early professionals are reporting higher levels of distress, as well as parents, as well as Black employees and those of lower socioeconomic status. And so in general, most people have probably had to grapple with some form of trauma over this past year, which is a sort of prolonged experience of distress that impacts your well-being. And so that is what employers are trying to manage. Some are not aware that they're actually managing trauma, but that is what they are dealing with in a workplace context as the way we work continues to shift and evolve with this pandemic.
So Shanna, when the coronavirus pandemic first hit, it seemed as though employers were, if not sympathetic, at least very aware of the burdens and challenges that their employees were facing, or at least there was a sense that we're all in this together and we're going to muscle through. Have they lost sight of these challenges? Have they become almost inured to the stresses that people are facing?
I think in the beginning, it was this rush or need to pivot the way we work. And corporations or organizations realized that they needed to get everyone on board to do that. I don't know if all organizations were really attuned to the stress, distress, and potential trauma employees were facing. They might have seen signs and called it Zoom fatigue when it was actually could have been something much more deep that the employee was managing. I think now what's happened is that people are trying to figure out this new iteration of work, be it a hybrid, be it everyone comes back or a mixed bag. And in that, what we are seeing is that a lot of organizations are reverting back to that pre COVID sort of mentality around things. And so it's becoming a challenge to figure out how to keep employees at the forefront when what employees want and need may not be in alignment with your previous way of working. And so that is what I think most employers are trying to grapple with of how do we redefine our values in light of this new iteration of work.
Liz, what is the conversation right now around work-life balance and mental health that's taking place?
Yeah, so very similar to what Shanna pointed out, what we're seeing in the research and also anecdotally what I've seen is that 2021 was really the year, and 2020 to some extent, but I think more and more over the past 6 months, the year when employees just said, I've had enough. So for many, that meant that they were no longer in the office, they weren't spending that time commuting, and so that allowed them to rediscover all of these other parts of life that they find meaningful, spending time with their family, drawing, just not being at work. There's, some did a lot of volunteering, campaigning, that kind of thing. And so I think we've seen that, not only with people who are remote, people on the front lines who are just in healthcare and have seen so much and are exhausted, who are on a manufacturing floor and are saying, I'm just tired of being treated like this. And so as more people start to leave, you're actually seeing that create this movement. Quit rates have hit unprecedented highs over the last 6 months, and that doesn't seem to be slowing down at all. A lot of employers want to look at quantitative pieces, so salary, or maybe we need to offer more benefits, and those things are great. And yes, you should definitely pay people more and offer good benefits. But there's also this qualitative piece, which is you have human beings that are working for you, and they don't feel like they're treated like humans. So I really think that the answer is both in supporting people with policies, with better wages, but then also trying to create cultures in which they feel included, empowered to succeed, and a sense of belonging is, equally important in creating a company where people won't want to leave.
So, Shanna, as Liz was just saying, it's not all about the money, it's about humanizing the workplace. Shanna, how are forward-thinking managers and leaders using best practices to cultivate healthy company cultures?
Yeah, great question. And sort of pull from what Liz was saying, this thing that they're calling the great resignation, some people are terming it the great reckoning, right? Where employees are pretty much saying that, hey, we realize that we have value in this company and that we have standards on how we want to be treated and our well-being matters. And so what really forward-thinking companies are doing, they are using this last year or plus to repivot their internal value system to really put employee well-being at the center of what they do. It is a major driver of most employee outcomes, productivity, motivation, what they call organizational citizenship behavior. That means just being a good employee or colleague to work with. And so, really forward thinking organizations are realizing that even if they don't have the sort of quantitative statistics behind it, that this is an important driver of work, and they're putting that at the forefront. And they're starting with trying to change internal behaviors and belief systems around what it means to take care of employees. Previously, companies would focus on wellness, and wellness kind of got corrupted in corporate and organizational spaces by focusing only on the physical health of the employee. But really forward thinking in companies are realizing that the psychology, the emotional well-being of employees matter, in providing trainings and opportunities for employees to be able to develop those skills, and also supporting managers in the development of those skills as well.
Let's talk specifics. Liz, what are some ways that forward-thinking organizations are being thoughtful about culture and inclusivity, especially now that so many people are working from home or working a hybrid schedule?
So, I think a couple specific things I've heard people doing, especially chief human resources officers. And the first is really simplifying their cultural values. So, one CHRO told me that she used to have 20 cultural values, and it's really hard to remember 20 values. So, instead, they've pared it down to four and then attached specific behaviors that help people live and amplify those values. So, first, I think just realizing that people are bombarded with information. They're also stressed. There's a lot of things going on that lead to just being in a state of heightened emotion. And that will make it harder for people to, again, remember 20 values. So, making it as easy as possible for them to do the right thing and take the best next step. So, again, that goes down to simplifying your values. As leadership, then really modeling those. So, if you do want people to take more vacation, take care of their mental health, you need to be doing that first because you can tell someone day in and day out that they should be taking more paid time off. But if their manager is not taking it off, if leadership's not taking it off, you actually haven't created a culture in which they feel safe taking that benefit. And the last one that I'll point out is there are people within your organization that are culture creators. So these people are often helping others, saying thank you, organizing events for people that keep everyone connected, and making sure that you're not only recognizing those people, but actually rewarding them for their behaviors. So LinkedIn wrote out a policy where people who are in employee resource groups who do a lot to, again, bring others within the organization together, create these safe spaces for conversation, they're actually getting financially compensated for their work now, which most organizations don't do. And again, that's work that's being asked of them, really useful to the organization, really helpful to people within that company, but often there's not actually an incentive to do it because it takes time away from your real work. You're not getting promoted for it. And so I think it's really great for organizations to start putting their money where their mouths are. And again, it's kind of financially compensate those kinds of behaviors that are so important for creating an inclusive organization.
Shanna, the pandemic has shown us that flexibility is critical to workers and that giving employees more control over when, where, and how they work improves their job satisfaction and their engagement and productivity. What has struck you about the ways in which employers are calling employees back to the office? How are best-in-class companies demonstrating their cultural values here?
Right. We know that, and it's always been this pre-pandemic. I think what the pandemic period has done is it has brought a lot of the things we already knew into sort of relief. It sort of brought it to the forefront of the sort of corporate table of discussion. And so we know that employees function best with maximum autonomy in their roles. And within that idea of autonomy, there is this idea of flexibility. And whereas a lot of organizations did not have a remote workforce, some didn't even have a flexible workplace policy, the pandemic shifted all that. It changed the game completely. And now it makes that business case as to why it can't be done a lot harder. The companies that I see that are really forward thinking, they're realizing, hey, employees are adults and that they can decide what works best for them and their personal life. So let's let them choose. And we make the adjustments on our end to accommodate them as long as they are still meeting their performance standards. And for the most part, it has been working out that employees are choosing what works best for them. I think a lot of employers fear that all the employees will say they don't want to come into the office, but that's not the case. You are having segments, even in these organizations that are offering choice, you are having employee segments who do want to come into the office or who opt to come in a couple days out of the week. And so that is really what is sort of driving, I think, the more forward thinking companies to give employees the right to choose what works best for them.
Liz, what's your advice? Shanna was just talking about how giving them autonomy, the freedom to make the choice for themselves, is what a lot of employers are thinking. How are you advising your clients on this issue?
One trend that I've been seeing, especially over the past year, is companies starting to monitor employee behavior on the computer. So when you move your mouse, what browser you're in, what your keystrokes, and that I just very strongly advise against. it goes back to this thing about human beings need to feel like they're humans at work. That's just such a fundamental piece of staying at a job and wanting to stay there. And it's a horrible way to measure productivity. It's a horrible way to motivate. I think you're actually doing exactly the opposite. And it's just not making people feel like humans. I've also seen on social media, people will like attach their mouse to their Roomba to make sure that the mouse is going the whole day. So it's just not actually measuring what you want it to. I think it's just so important first to motivate with a mission. So when things are really uncertain, creating a 3-month mission for people to rally around. And that might be cultural. So we're really going to invest in inclusion. Here's a couple ways we're going to do that. Let's see how it goes over the next 3 months. It could be a business-focused thing. We want to launch this product. We want to deliver exceptional customer service over the next 3 months. I think those are nice. And then I think Shanna actually just said what I was going to, which is just emphasizing the importance of autonomy and having managers give employees direction, but not directions. So setting really clear timelines, milestones, success criteria, and then stepping back and letting people figure it out. So you should, as a manager, always be there to answer questions along the way, but you shouldn't be there every single step along the way. That's micromanagement, and again, it's just a horrible way to manage people. It's very demotivational. So that requires, I think, one of the skills that companies and managers will really have to build over the next year, 6 months, and even longer, is creating these really clear success criteria. I don't think that's happened. I think we still are in this space of being in the office where it was just like, I see that person sitting in front of their computer, therefore they're working hard, which again wasn't always true, but we just have this bias within us of if I see them, they're here, they're committed, they're working. And so we really need to detach from that and then again start setting these very clear criteria so that we're accurately measuring performance, not access or visibility.
Shanna, is this stuff intuitive? Should employers be doing more training here?
To answer the first question, the easiest one, is it intuitive? No, it's not. I built most of my career in human resources before starting Wellbeing Works. And it wasn't until I started to study this stuff as a social psychologist that I realized the sort of interconnectedness between mental health, distress, and performance. And so, no, it's not intuitive. And so managers absolutely need training to help them be able to really support employees in a way that is supportive of their well-being within the organization. Within the trainings that we do at Wellbeing Works, we advocate for employers, for managers and human resources professionals who often coach managers to be able to shift from what we call a performance lens, meaning you view employee behavior from a workplace conduct or performance perspective because you're looking at the implications of that behavior on performance. So how do you shift from that to a mental health lens? A mental health lens, you view the behavior, but the objective is support. With the performance lens, the objective is correction. And granted, mental health challenges can impact performance, but with support, you can get them back on track, probably much more sustainably so than the classic performance improvement plan. But that's not how most organizations, how their processes internally are hardwired. By the time performance issues get to human resources professionals' desk, it's already sort of packaged as such. And it takes a really intuitive or knowledgeable, I want to say intuitive, knowledgeable HR professional to unpack what is being presented to them to ask the question, could there be more to this? And so practice and giving managers the opportunity to develop those skills and then holding them accountable is really important to be able to shift the workplace culture to align with a more employee well-being focused practice.
As we wrap up, I would like to give you each an opportunity to say what your number one piece of advice to employers is. As the pandemic is not over, our second COVID winter approaches. Liz, what are you telling clients right now to promote employee well-being?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid of offering emotional support to people. It's so key to retaining them, to helping them feel like the organization cares about them. Companies are often afraid of emotions and emotional support because they've learned to see emotions as anger or tears. And that actually means that you've done a really bad job of creating space for people to express themselves, because those things tend to happen when we've bottled things up, we don't have an outlet, and then it explodes in this bigger way. Side note, really interesting research shows specifically around women, and this is the research treated gender as binary, but still kind of interesting finding most men think that women cry in the office because they're sad. And most women say, I actually cried because I was really frustrated. And so again, you're not always picking up on exactly what's going on with someone if you're not asking questions, creating those small moments in one-on-ones, in team meetings for people to express themselves. And then within that, the final point I'll make is also giving space for people to not share if they don't want to. So that's the other thing that I see go wrong with this advice, is that managers suddenly want to sit down and say, oh, you're part of this group, let's talk about it. That person might not want to talk about it with you. Emotional support often can look like, hey, I'm here for you if you need me, if you need to take an afternoon, if you need some more flexibility tomorrow, if you just need to be offline for the afternoon, I get it. How can I help you? And again, that's where those key performance metrics come in handy, because most likely that person can adjust their schedule, they can take the time they need and still perform well if you're giving them that autonomy.
Shanna, number one piece of advice?
Awesome. So at Wellbeing Works, we think of employee well-being as being sort of a pyramid. So once you know you're paying your employees well, they have the resources they need to do their job, they are physically safe. My number one advice would be to focus on psychological safety. It tracks with so many of the other major employee well-being outcomes. And that's psychological safety, as we define it, is the capacity to show up to work authentically, ask questions, ask for support, and push back without fear of negative consequences. So having managers model vulnerability, having managers be very self-aware and track how they're feeling in a moment, how they respond when employees do ask questions, when employees do ask support, is a great way to foster continued psychological safety, as well as having a culture that rewards psychologically safe teams, not necessarily productive teams that do it at the expense of psychological safety, but teams that are able to perform and still maintain that psychological safety. So investing training resources and support in that area can offer a lot of really tangible benefits for organizations and teams.
Thank you both to Liz and Shanna, and I want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in to this insider conversation on HR innovation. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you so much, Shanna and Liz. It's great to hear notes on how managers can prioritize the needs of their workers. So what about you? What changes would you like to see in your organization? Share your responses with the hashtag #InsiderEvents. Up next, leaders and innovators will discuss how HR should approach the concept of innovation in the workplace and what tools they should use to support a healthy and productive workforce. Please welcome small business editor Emily Canal and her group of panelists for a discussion entitled Activating Innovation.
Thank you, Brandon. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. 4 million Americans quit their jobs in July in part of a new movement dubbed the Great Resignation. Meanwhile, there were nearly 11 million open jobs that month. Employers are struggling to both attract and retain talent. We are living and working in a revolutionary time. The Great Resignation is changing almost everything about our culture, from the way we make and spend money to the desirable jobs of the future. Innovation in HR is helping employers navigate this new landscape, and we're going to see how Facebook is tackling this. I'm joined by 2 Facebook executives, Ujwal Singh, the head of product at Workplace, and Jana Sevilla, the director of employee experience. Ujwal, you came to Workplace from GoFundMe, where you were the chief technology officer. Can you tell us a bit about your background there and the unique position it gives you at Workplace?
Sure, thank you. Happy to be here. And in terms of GoFundMe, one of the things that I learned there pretty acutely is the importance of people. Both, every person has their story. And as most of you know, GoFundMe is essentially a crowdfunding site for personal causes. And the piece that really worked for me or resonated with me is how all of us, it doesn't matter who we are, need help at some time, and we need to have a community around us. And one of the things that really appeals to me about Workplace and what we do at Facebook is our mission is to bring community to work. And I think that notion of community and belonging and having connections and people who support you in in a place, an environment where we spend a lot of our time, work, is something that's really powerful, and it sort of connects me back to GoFundMe, where we were like trying to do that bring a community to people who needed help in their day-to-day lives.
Great. Janice, you were the head of digital customer experience at JP Morgan Chase before joining Facebook. This is the company's first role dedicated to the employee experience. How does your background inform what you hope to do at Facebook?
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here as well. By spending the most recent part of my career on the customer experience strategy side of business, I've been able to apply certain principles and competencies that some of the best companies use to build really strong and valuable relationships. And this is, when we think about this from a customer side, and then if we transition that to what does it mean for people in general? And so transferring that over to HR, how do we deliver our programs and services for our employees? And so what I'm hoping to do is really bring the mindset and the discipline and the competencies for how we deliver great customer experiences internally with our own employees who are also interacting with our brand every day at different touch points, and make sure that we apply those same principles for how we treat our employees. And so these two go hand in hand, employee experience and customer experience. It's really about how people experience the brand, who are interacting with the brand every single day.
Can you both tell us more about the workplace product and how it specifically helps employers navigate the unique HR challenges today?
Sure. Why don't I get started and then you can jump in, Janice. The workplace product really specifically is built around putting people first and foremost. And around that, like, there's some specific things that we really focus on. We really believe that this is something that, like, all companies have to now deal with in the new world we live in. And so the things that we focus on are, how do we get a connection between people and employees and their leaders, and employees and the company mission? That connection really matters. How do we instill belonging at work? How do we create a community for folks? How do you listen to employees? How do you react and accommodate what employees are saying? Prioritizing health and well-being. Enabling hybrid work environments, right? People now are working from potentially different time zones and different locations on different types of devices even. And then finally, I think the piece that, again, we lean into a workplace is, how do you show up authentically? If you're a leader, like, authenticity really matters. And part of that authenticity is being able to communicate as a person to another person, not just via email, but being able to, like, show up and look someone in the eye and call them out in terms of by their name and answer questions directly. So first and foremost, workplace helps connect across the organization, connect people across the organization with leaders, with appropriate content, so that they can stay informed, and with each other. The second piece that I think is really important to call out, and that's really unique about Workplace, is Workplace is built on our existing Facebook consumer tools. So when you first see Workplace at work, it's not a giant learning curve. Reactions and posts and comments and live are all things that billions of people are used to and have seen on the Facebook platform. And what we try to do is carry forward that usability into the work environment. The other piece, like I mentioned, hybrid work. Workplace, we found, really enables sync and async work really efficiently. Finally, the Workplace, we found, is an incredible platform for two-way communication. So it's not just here's a broadcast, but it's a platform that allows employees to actually give feedback on whatever the policy might be, or a direction might be, or the mission or the vision, or whatever the case might be. And that two-way feedback really is a key part of what we think is both necessary today and will be even more necessary going into the future.
Janice, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, it's absolutely true. And if you think about what you all just shared from an HR perspective or an employee experience perspective, what we're doing is looking to map out these journeys and understand how employees are experiencing their work life at Facebook, how they're building community. And Workplace enables us to have that real-time understanding and sentiment, understanding their mindsets, their pain points, their needs, and then mapping those into journeys, whether it's, understanding the onboarding experience in the first 6 months, or how they might want to grow their career, or how they might be thinking about returning to the office or a hybrid environment. And so we use it in multiple ways, both to sort of understand sentiment, to target diverse groups of employees and really hear all voices and how people are experiencing and what really matters to them in their work life at Facebook. So we have found it to be a very effective tool on a lot of different fronts, and in particular as a really great input into mapping sort of current state journeys and helping us to design what the future state experience should be. Again, whether it's in onboarding or these other journeys across the life cycle at Facebook.
And how does Workplace bring innovation to HR? Janice, maybe you can start.
Yeah, so, typically when we think of innovation, we think of technology. And of course, technology, we have amazing innovation in technology. What we're looking to do is help everyone understand that being innovative and trying new things can happen anywhere. Part of this is I feel that HR is just really ready to bring innovation and design thinking and human-centered design to the way we design our HR programs and deliver those services. So we are working to help build that muscle within HR and try to shift away from HR feeling more transactional. And when employees engage with our programs and services, we'd rather it feel like a rich experience and more personalized. And so there's a lot of opportunity to innovate in HR right now. And it's really about bringing in those competencies and skill sets around design, human-centered design, using people-first strategy, really doing rich listening, mapping the journeys, and then aligning the ecosystem around what are the experiences we want to deliver.
Ujwal, how is Workplace also bringing innovation to HR?
Yeah, so just building on what Janice said, how do you build equity with the tools? And when I say equity, I actually mean everything from serving employees no matter what their job function is. So everything from knowledge workers to frontline workers, that's part of equity. But also allowing people to consume and create content and interact with others across different devices, across different services, across different locations and time zones. So the equity is a big part of like how we think about what it needs to exist in the future. And then the final part is Facebook has, as most of you know, a big investment in what we call Facebook Reality Labs, which is building out the metaverse. We think there's some really interesting opportunity around you actually leveraging some of the concepts in the metaverse to enrich connection, to enrich productivity, and ultimately to enrich well-being. And all of these things lead to business outcomes like higher productivity, higher retention, happier employees, all of those kinds of things. So that's, I think, broadly speaking, that's sort of where we're headed.
How employees identify is a huge part of HR today. When someone shares their identity with the digital world, how can employers use that information to focus on creating a sense of belonging and connection at work? Ujwal, would you like to weigh in?
So, I think that the best way to maybe highlight this is an example feature we launched this last year. And it sounds like a really trivial feature. There's a couple of these, but it actually, we found, and our customers have told us this makes a big difference. So in Workplace, an employee can actually create a profile and they can say, hey, this is who I am at work. This is my job. This is how I should be referred to, like pronouns, like all of those. One of the things we added, and again, it's a subtle thing, we added the ability to put in name pronunciation. And what we do is we have some AI systems that try to guess what your name should be pronounced as. And then employees can go in and edit it. It makes a huge difference. So let's say now I'm going live and I'm answering a question. Instead of trying to guess who, because I can see their name, instead of trying to guess who that question is, I can actually say, hey, Janice, that's a great question. Here's the answer. And just that subtle thing of me being able to say the name correctly and using the name creates a connection. Creates like now Janice like is more likely to listen to what I'm saying and more likely to potentially be able to interact with that message much more so than if it was a generic message. So like name pronunciation is like an obvious one that like, from a digital perspective, like people showing up and feeling like their real self is showing up. Simple things like being able to have skin tone on emojis. Again, these exist on the consumer side. We brought it to work. These things just seem little minor things, but it's the little things that add up to make it feel like I belong in this tool, in this digital world.
Janice, do you have any specific examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, as usual, was just talking. I was just thinking about some of the research we've done to understand how managers build connected, feel more connected, and how employees feel more connected. One of the things we've learned through research is that people are looking for people like themselves. They're looking to feel connected at an emotional level, and by enabling it through some of these tools, we're able to help everybody feel part of something, and that this is a place for them, because that's what they're asking themselves. Do I want to work there? Do I want to engage there? Do I see and feel accepted? And can I be authentic? And are there people like me? Is it the right place for me? And so everything he's talking about, Ujjwal, right now is just so, it's great, because they do seem simple, but they are deeply emotional. They're the little things in these journeys that employees have that then engage their emotional connection to that particular company or organization. It helps build their purpose. These are the exciting aspects of where we're headed in the evolution of these tools. And I think the more we learn about how people's needs and expectations are changing in this new hybrid world we're entering, it only just opens the door for more innovation and new features and aspects of things that we can do to really lead in the best place to work.
In regards to people-first initiatives, how can other employers craft innovative people-first policies? Janice?
So often when we think about innovation, we think about technology, and we have amazing technology and innovation in that space for sure. One way to do this is to use what product and others use around innovating a human-centered design approach, using design thinking and creative problem solving, and apply those skills and those competencies to HR, and really build that muscle within HR to think differently, to try new things, to let go of old ways and move away from transactional and really reimagine the way we deliver our programs and our policies and our services. And to really dig into how are those really necessary? Are all of the policies we have really necessary? And what impact is it having on the employee experience? Can we do things differently? Is there a better way? And a big piece of that is understanding how employees' needs have changed and what they need and expect, and what the way that they want to engage with our HR programs and services. And so it's a balance of understanding those needs and then mixing that with what are the business needs, using human-centered design thinking, and innovative approaches to coming up and exploring a broader set of solutions for how we engage and how we deliver HR services, policies, and programs.
Ujjwal, can you weigh in?
Yes, just to build on what Janice said, I think there are two specific things employers can focus on in terms of building people-first policies. First is I broadly call authenticity, and when I say authenticity, what I mean by that is allowing both leaders as well as employees to show up as their true self. So authenticity is a key part of like building people-first policies. The second piece I think is goes right to the heart of hybrid work. And it's really around the challenges of like being able to deal with synchronous and collaboration in and outside of sort of a physical meeting room that like exists today. And it really boils down to close ties and loose ties. If I'm working with a set of people on a project, I'm likely seeing them and interacting with them, 20 times a day. And over time, that builds close ties. But it's equally important for me to be able to have a water cooler moment with other employees that I don't directly work with, but I want to be connected with and be able to see, hear from them and be able to exchange stories, talk about the latest TV show or the new restaurant that's opened up in London. Those are loose ties. And so focusing on the ability, and again, using tools, policies, process to enable employees to have close ties and loose ties will enable employers to have innovative people-first policies.
You mentioned equity, which has been a major theme for employers throughout the pandemic, especially when it comes to access, methods of collaboration, and feeling productive in your work environment. How is Workplace ensuring equity across Facebook? Ujwal, can you start?
Yeah, today, as I mentioned earlier, equity really comes down to multiple dimensions. It's not just it's not just about making sure everyone has access to Workplace. It's really, obviously that's part of it, but you have to be equitable in terms of information, equitable in terms of how you connect with each other and giving people a chance to connect. And connection isn't just being able to follow, but connection is being able to interact with people at all levels. Equity is also making sure, regardless of where I work and how I work, I am equally productive if I work at home versus if I'm in the office or if I'm in a hybrid mode, potentially. And then the final thing that we take very seriously is equity across different types of employee experiences or different types of employees. Like a employee experience is something that becomes a catch-all, but not all employees are equal. Not all employees do the same type of work. Broadly, knowledge workers have very different needs than frontline workers. Many times frontline workers have even more basic needs than knowledge workers. For example, identity. Now, a lot of frontline workers don't have identity in the companies they work for. They don't get a device from the company. They don't even get an email address from the company that they work for. So equity to information there across those two groups of types of workers becomes a really important thing. That's the kind of thing that Workplace really is focused on. Is we try to give people equitable access to each other, people, as well as content, which I think leads to deeper connection, leads to more productivity, leads to more sense of belonging, and therefore, higher retention from a business standpoint, more productivity, and well-being. Frankly, just at the end of the day, well-being of employees.
Janice, how can other employers ensure equity across their employees?
Yeah, that's great. I just to build upon what Ujwal's talking about, it is, when we talk about equity, it means so many different things. And different groups of people have different needs. And so understanding, digging deep, doing the research, looking at multiple sources of data to understand different segments and what different people's needs are based on what we call personas is so important because what one group, just giving access, just like Ujwal was saying, just because you give access to everyone doesn't mean everyone is going to feel included. And so what are the things that help people feel included and feel part of it? And honestly, it's in addition to the technology and the platform, it's everyday behaviors. Are you bringing in different people from different groups that you normally wouldn't? Are you looking for that different perspective? Or are you going to the same people over and over and using the same communication or the same tools in the same way? So it's really about, having different representation of diverse sets of people at the table, sharing ideas, communicating, and then doing the deep research to understand how people might perceive things differently or what their needs are, because they are different, and what helps them feel part of something and included. And then it's about distilling that into policies and behaviors and making sure that the leadership is aligned around what we promise to deliver when we mean equity. So it becomes more than just words on a page or words on a screen. It's really about what's driving our behaviors. What are we doing every day to help more people feel included?
Ujwal, how does Facebook leverage its devices and technology to enable the people first and equity policies that you both have outlined?
There are numerous examples. Like one of the things I mentioned earlier about name pronunciation. Again, a simple example, but it really does make a difference and makes it feel much more equitable. The Notion workplace allows you to create groups. Like we have all sorts of different groups that people create around, both at Facebook and some of our customers that use it. That leads to community building. Like it may be around, I'm based in London, but there's a London foodie group at Facebook, and that's just a small community of people who post interesting restaurant finds. Now, that doesn't seem like, again, a major thing, but it leads to that notion of well-being and having other people that I can actually feel like I'm connected to in a loose ties type of way. Other specific things that we do is we look at giving access across all sorts of devices. So mobile access. Again, the thing I mentioned earlier, frontline employees don't have access to a computer necessarily. So being able to reach them, especially if there's a key message that needs to go out to all employees, regardless of frontline or knowledge worker, being able to reach them on mobile devices is really important. So equity across devices is something that we actually really build for and design for. Over time, you're going to see a bunch more work here around as we leverage the metaverse in terms of how does the metaverse help solve some of the problems around hybrid work or challenges around hybrid work, and how do we make actually the metaverse a much more equitable place for all sorts of employees to sort of participate in and experience or partake in the experiences that will be part of the metaverse for work here. Obviously, there's the consumer side, but I'm referring to work. So stay tuned on some of the things that will happen in the metaverse. I'd encourage everyone to go to workplace.com and check out what some of our announcements that are going to be coming up front, and to just see how our tools and our take on the how we think about some of these challenges in this brave new world we live in can help shape HR practices.
As 2021 comes to an end, we can expect to see more conversations next year about innovating HR in order to attract and retain employees. Thank you, Ujwal and Janice, for discussing these topics with us. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Emily, Janice, and Ujwal. And thank you all for watching. Please remember to take our survey at any time during the event. Just click on the icon at the bottom of the page. If you're sharing thoughts online, please remember to use the hashtag #InsiderEvents. And now, technology is transforming our world faster than ever before. Our next session touches on one element where innovation is pushing boundaries: artificial intelligence. There are so many new tools that allow employees to practice hard conversations and help hiring managers and recruiters avoid bias. In this next session, you'll also hear about how businesses can optimize tech and innovation to support their workforce. Please welcome back Emily Canal, Insider's small business editor, and her guest who will talk about the new use of AI for HR.
Thank you, Brandon. We are in unprecedented times when it comes to HR. There are a record number of open positions in the US, and 41% of employees worldwide plan to leave their current jobs by the end of this year. Employers have to get savvy about the way they retain and attract talent, and one of the ways they can do that is with artificial intelligence. Businesses can use AI to train their staff, remove biases in the hiring process, and glean what conditions might prompt a worker to quit. We're going to hear from IBM and extended reality startup Tailspin on how they're using AI in the workplace today. I'm joined by Amy Wright, the managing partner of talent transformation at IBM Global Business Services, and Kyle Jackson, CEO and co-founder of Tailspin. I'd like to start off by asking, what are the other ways AI can help employers with the hiring process? Amy, can you start?
So first of all, great to be here with both you and Kyle. Thank you so much for having me. So first, I think it's important we all aligned on what AI can actually do. So AI it has massive computing power, and it can ingest massive amounts of data. And so therefore what it's able to do is use pattern recognition to be able to help with insights so we can make decisions. It does not make decisions for us. It uses this massive computing power to use historical data. So how is that helpful in the hiring process? There are so many ways, Emily. For example, oftentimes candidates get kind of stuck in a process that isn't particularly timely. AI can identify where where there are roadblocks and where there are time gaps, and can literally assign candidates to specific individuals who might have some alignment to push them forward in the process. AI can also do things like helping expand the talent pool, because if you can identify what skill sets an individual has, that then enables the organization to identify what adjacent skills are to the roles they're trying to fill. So by speeding up the process and identifying how to expand the talent pool, it can have a pretty dramatic impact on your hiring results.
Sounds like it. Kyle, I'd love for you to weigh in as well.
I mean, just echoing everything that Amy just said. I mean, we're focused more on using kind of simulation as an additional layer, which uses AI in a number of forms to mimic the different things that you want to accomplish in those simulations. And the goal of using simulation is to give people a better view into those future roles, or actually almost better pre-qualify themselves for fit. And so it's bringing an entirely new capability to that hiring process and to that talent management process that, is really about access. If I'm somebody who's trying to find mobility inside my own organization, this ability to kind of step into simulations or to, kind of almost try before you buy new roles is another really powerful way to use, AI and machine learning to help really empower the individual to make those decisions.
Thank you both. That's great. Amy, in recent years, there has been a growing awareness about biases and unknown biases in hiring. How can AI specifically help employers combat that?
So when it's carefully designed with human intervention, what AI can do is recognize bias-based language. So that helps to identify where there potentially could be an issue with diversity or age or ethnicity. And so then by flagging those potential challenges, the organization, the people responsible can help stop them. But it doesn't stop bias on its own. What AI does is flag, here's a potential issue, and then enables organizations to deal with it in the most appropriate way.
Kyle, would you like to weigh in as well?
Yeah, I think there's another layer that's kind of fun to think about and equally potentially impactful, which is when we use our current processes and structures to bring people in an organization, the types of solutions that Amy's talking about are a way to kind of mitigate some of those processes and honestly even biases in the people themselves. And so that's super powerful. One other way in which we can start to move the needle on this is actually start to look at kind of the skill level. And Amy, you mentioned it, is how do you get down to actually looking kind of at the competency and skill level, because that has no bias. There's no name attached to that skill. There's no ethnicity attached to that skill. There's no age attached to that skill. It's just purely like, it's an objective measure of fit. And that's really, really powerful for trying to, one, find talents inside your organization. Again, it's how do you find the people that you need to plug these holes? And everybody's got them. And there is a challenge both in people looking for new roles outside of the organization, as well as finding their way inside of the organization. So, as much as you can remove the bias out of the process, I think you open up those pathways for those people to discover those things. The way we do that is again, in simulation, via kind of a soft skills simulation or a hard skills simulation. It doesn't know who the user is. All we're looking at is how did they handle that situation? Did they make the right decisions? Did they ultimately prove competency in something that's really important to the hiring manager? That's ultimately the lens we should be viewing this stuff through, and that by doing it that way, you kind of inherently take it out of the process. So it's another way where not directly using AI to extract those bits of process, but using it in a different form to kind of accomplish the same goal.
Kyle, I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, we have a great client, Takeda, who does a ton of hiring. We've worked with them on is how to do exactly what you're suggesting. First of all, they do a lot of practicing on having those conversations in the right way. Now there are tools that help identify whether or not the conversation had some bias in it. But what they've done through this is they've been able to establish literally competency-based interview guides that have nothing to do with the individuals themselves, but rather the skills that the individual has achieved. They've also been able to do blind resume reviews where it has nothing to, you don't even know what the gender is or the ethnicity of the individual, and then diverse cross-functional interview teams. So they've been able to change their whole hiring approach by using AI to help them with the bias agenda, but that agenda then changed their whole processes. So they used these identification tools to try to suggest where do we have an issue in the process, and then flip the whole process on its side.
So cool.
Wow, that is really
so cool. And skills is right at the core. I'm totally with you there.
Thank you, Amy. Of course, the labor shortage isn't just about hiring. It's also about keeping the employees you have. One of the benefits businesses can offer their staff is training, especially when they're trying to invest in their staff's future. Kyle, how can employers use AI in the workplace training sessions?
So it's building a lot off of what we've been talking about, because what we're doing is we're using this ability to step into a role before you're actually in the role, through simulation, or like Amy was just saying, actually, step into a conversation, a sales conversation, a managerial conversation, all sorts of conversations that are going to be really important to being successful in that role, and actually do that before you're in the line of fire. And what that means is we have the power to self-select. Ourselves. There are certain things that just aren't going to be a fit for us because it's uncomfortable, or there's an identified skill gap that comes out of that experience that then we know that that's part of the investment we need to make in ourselves to be successful in that role. So at least my experience has been there's kind of this firewall between assessment, recruiting, and training historically in the corporate world. And the more you can bring simulation, job simulation, and kind of this the traditional training processes up into the recruiting and alignment process, the more you can expose those benefits earlier on. It's kind of one of those we always like to say, it's you get it for free. Like if you've done this right. All of a sudden, this training tool that you thought you were going to use once the candidate's been identified is something you can use before they've been identified, and that means your whole flexibility, your whole talent mobility model changes.
Amy, job candidates require different skills right now as we navigate remote and hybrid work. How can AI help employers stay agile when it comes to offering useful training?
The skills point we've been talking about is a really crucial one. So one of the ways to help employees get ready for the future, and therefore help employers, is to always keep up on the skills agenda. And we both at IBM and with our clients use something we call skills inference, which doesn't use the a job description to say Amy has XYZ skills. It uses that data and lots of other data about an employee to be able to infer what depth of skills they have and in what areas. And once you can do that, once you have a skills profile, then you're able to identify the gap between Amy, in this example, my current skills and the skills I either need for my current role, or the role I aspire to have, or the role that my company aspires for me to have. It allows us to suggest education and experiences for each of our employees, so that they can build their skills for the future as they have their current job. It also helps the talent acquisition area, because you don't always have to depend on, I don't have this skill, so let me go hire it from the outside. You can then look at internal mobility as a way to fill the skill gap.
Thank you so much. So speaking of skills, what are some of the most valuable skills that employers can teach employees next year with the help of AI, especially as we continue to work remotely or in a hybrid environment?
There's a point just off of what Amy just said, and we're thinking about stackable skills. We're thinking about the root ingredients of what makes us successful, not just like, I can install this type of equipment, or I have this type of managerial experience. That means that, career pathways, training pathways, all these things that are interrelated start to become quite a bit more flexible through that lens. As an individual, if I have that lens, understanding what my strongest ingredients are as a contributor, there's going to be a lot of non-obvious things open up to me, especially how quickly the world of work is changing. So stackable skills, right? Like the more you can work on these horizontally applicable stackable skills. And the way that I think that often gets bubbled up is in soft skills descriptors, things like the critical skill building for sales or managerial or communication, these types of essential functions that are becoming really broad. But the actual methodology is much more, it's applicable across the entire space of hard and soft skills. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That concept of stackable skills. So it's not necessarily just a skill listed as part of a job description. It's what's required beneath that to have that skill, or what's required to bring that skill to life and make it successful. And some of the things that are coming up now are, first of all, applicable across industries. So it used to be that someone with a certain skill set was specific to an industry or one type of company. And now those same skills, because of this digital transformation we're all going through, are applicable across industries. And certainly in the remote environment that we're in, and this constant transformation, our soft skills and our leadership skills have changed dramatically over what was required to be successful just a few years ago. And it's required at more levels of an organization. Leadership capabilities that were required at more of a senior level several years ago are now required even at a team leader level.
Thank you both. AI can also be used to collect data and glean results. For example, AI could help an employer understand why one of their workers might want to quit. Amy, how can businesses use this information to retain their staff?
So we see this all the time. We actually work with a lot of companies to do what we call predictive attrition. And I have a great example from one of our clients, Banfield Pet Hospital, who's just has a distributed set of hospitals across the country, thousands of them. And so their objective is making your pet's life wonderful. And in doing that, it makes the pet owner's life wonderful. And so it's all about having their employees who care deeply for this aspiration make their lives and their experiences as good as they can make it. So a big part of that is this identifying the traits or the situation that would make someone think about leaving. And you can use AI to identify what the situation is that an individual may be in. As a matter of fact, at Banfield, they've developed a people power index, which actually takes 100 different factors, 25 of them the most relevant, and identifies what the index is of an individual's likelihood of leaving. It could be based upon the team they're in, or the fact that their manager changed multiple times, or what's happening in society, or the specific profitability of the hospital they're in. So there's a lot of factors. But why AI plays a big role in this is that it's not typically one factor. It's the combination of these factors, and then looking at historical data of others that have left or stayed. You're able to correlate that to your existing employees. So it doesn't make a decision for a manager, but what it does is it highlights, there's a high likelihood that Amy is likely to attrit, and here's some of the things that you could do to try to curb that attrition. So a lot of companies are starting to use this, and it really is an important aspect of their whole talent agenda.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you. Kyle, I'm curious, what are some of the active and passive solutions that AI can offer employers as well?
What Amy was just saying is a great example of a passive solution where, there's a lot of indicators that can be observed through AI that would be missed, honestly, if that solution wasn't there. It's just, there's too many indicators going on that are disconnected from each other to identify those patterns. So that's an example where using AI kind of passively in the background to help inform a decision-making moment is really, really powerful. I think on the active side, the way I think about that is getting the individual to actively engage in the simulation, the AI, whatever it is that they're engaging in, the tool for their own progression. So that's an example where you're taking a passive tool and a lot of analysis, but you're giving it, you're moving into an active decision-making moment for that individual. For us, a lot of the training solutions and the simulations that we put in front of people, that's an active engagement, act of engagement, to go down that road. So by its very nature, the individual is opting in. They're taking a step to better understand where they rank, or if this is the right fit for them. And so that becomes a little bit more, I think, preventative, in terms of where that gets used. We've heard employers using this more and more to help individuals actually self-select out so that they don't have churn, because, one issue is people going through this moment in time we're in where they're really evaluating a lot of the factors of their life, and they make these decisions to move on. The other is as they move on, making sure that they're actually going to stay, and that needs to become a preventative measure. So the more you can help them opt in that next decision, the more likely you're going to solve it on both sides. And so in this case, AI plays a role in both.
Amy, how would you suggest a company starts using AI in their HR practices today?
There's not a specific use case that is common for everybody to start with. What is important, particularly if they're not if they haven't used if they're not mature in the AI realm, is to start with a business issue. The business issue could be high attrition. It could be skill sets. It could be learning. It could be, I mean, there are a million things it could be. It could be a particular geography in the world is having a business challenge. So start with figure out what a business issue is you want to tackle. And then the other thing I would say is that in order to be successful, pick that business issue and involve the user community in helping them to understand what the algorithms are or what the data is, because initially they won't believe it. They're not going to believe the machine is better than people. And it's not. I mean, the machine isn't better than people, but there will be insights that will arrive and they'll be surprised by some of these insights and they won't believe them at first. So it's really important to start with a business issue that if you use AI, it can then show how great it can be and how it can actually have business impact.
Kyle, same question to you. How can businesses get started using HI in their HR process?
Yeah, we're at a place of maturity now where there's a lot more, ready-made solutions, if you will, that are AI backed. And so there's a lot of solutions that are pretty easy to step into. The way that we apply that on our end is we have a growing library of kind of off-the-shelf simulations that help to assess certain areas or help to transfer certain skills that are very horizontal in nature. That's a very low lift to start to bring that in and start to look at those insights. And again, just like what Amy said, is I think the first instinct with some of this technology is to push back in terms of like, well, what's being looked at here? What's going on? How is this going to affect me or even in the HR function? How is this going to affect my role? But once you get over that hurdle and you actually start to see the data it gives you and the power it gives you in terms of decision making, it's just super exciting for those individuals. And we've watched that transformation over and over and over and over again once you get over that hurdle.
Thank you. And Kyle, are there any common mistakes that businesses should avoid when they're setting these processes up?
Oh boy. Well, add another half an hour. No, it's the same with any new technology, right? Like you have to be mindful about what the goals you have, and luckily now you can be specific and you can measure quickly, and then you can iterate. And so the same type of thinking that's required to deal with like how challenging the talent market is and how challenging this topic of talent mobility is. I mean, it's a very agile mindset that we all have to be in anymore. And so I would say pick a place to start that you know you can actually measure your outcomes quickly before you boil the ocean, and then iterate and find those nearest neighbors to expand. And when we've done it that way, we see that you ultimately are successful much faster than trying to boil the ocean.
Amy, do you see any common mistakes that businesses use when they use AI in HR?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a common mistake, but things to look out for, because we do see it here and there, is sometimes there's a belief that the underlying data doesn't need to be clean in order to make AI work. It'll just fix all of the problems in the underlying data. It doesn't fix anything. It reads what data one has. So a lot of times the companies need to get their data in shape, maybe get some systems connectivity in shape before being able to trust what the results are of the AI. That's one thing. Another one is that HR functions now have data scientists, and there's so much data that's not just in the control of the HR function, but it's accessible throughout the company. That's really useful to pull together. That it's important to have people that know how to do that so you can make progress quickly. And then finally, I would say make sure that the models are, you pull in the business leaders or whoever you're involved with and explain, because this is iterative. It's not like one shot and all of a sudden we got something that works perfectly. Even the technology that's available today, as good as it is, and it's good, it's going to iterate through time. And once a company decides, once an HR function decides to go down this path, they have to be prepared for the iteration, both in terms of the models, if you're building something, or, one vendor product might have something that's a perfect fit today, but it's not going to be just one product. It's going to be a series of them that's going to help you meet all your business needs. So be prepared for that iteration.
And to close out our conversation, I'd like to address a question from our audience. What are the major trends employers can expect to see next year in regards to AI in HR? And how can they prepare? Amy, can you start us off?
I mean, there's a lot of use cases that we've been working on for several years. So I think those new use cases will start to arrive. And I think one of the use cases is using AI to connect people to other people. So we've already seen this, starting to bubble up, but that connection point of others, either to be your coach or to be on your team, or to have complementary personalities or skill sets to be able to work effectively on a team together. So we've, again, started to see this bubble up, but I for sure think this is going to be a new trend that kind of hasn't hit the chorus line yet, if you will.
I think probably maybe some at the same root cause, of that trend is kind of continuing in a hybrid world where we're going to definitely see a larger percentage of the workforce remote. There's a desire for community and connection. So, I think that, using tools to help make those connections for people as organizations are constantly changing is going to be really powerful. Another trend or another thing I think we'll see is in the remote onboarding and recruiting. We've seen that, also exponentially grow. But one of the things that we keep hearing from our clients is how do we do that and create community at the same time? It's easy to kind of change one logo on Friday and pick up another logo on Monday if you don't have any connection to the business and the people you work with, and that connection is looser now. Using kind of immersive, community-based onboarding, AI-based, this whole topic that we've been talking about for the types of software we deliver. Is something they're trying to figure out into how to weave into that story, so that as people come out the other side of week 1, week 2, week 3, it is as close as we possibly can be to the intense on-site that used to be the onboarding process. And so it's a combination of these same tools that we've been talking about, but trying to create that connection to each other and to the business.
Thank you, Amy and Kyle. As the labor shortage continues, employers can use AI to either find new talent or entice their current workers to stay. It's a valuable HR tool as we start a new year in the pandemic. Thank you, Amy and Kyle, for discussing these topics with us. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Amy and Kyle, for that thoughtful discussion. With so many people leaving their jobs in search of more money, more flexibility, and more happiness, the Great Resignation is here and it is real. What can businesses do to retain their workforce? And what solutions do HR and business leaders need right now to slow down the Great Resignation? For our final session, please welcome Senior Strategy Editor Chris Weller and his panelists who will discuss how the Great Resignation can be avoided or at least slowed down. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Brandon. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows 4.3 million Americans, nearly 3% of the labor force, quit their jobs in August. It was a record-breaking month, and it continued a trend known as the Great Resignation. People everywhere are quitting in droves, creating a nationwide game of musical chairs. And all this churn creates unbelievable volatility. So what happens? Individual teams and whole companies become less stable. For the sake of their business, employers have a huge responsibility now to quickly figure out how to give their people what they need. Does that mean offering more wellness benefits? What about moving to a 4-day work week? To help us make sense of this chaos, we're joined by George Larock, founder and principal analyst at WorkTech, and Ian Cook, vice president of people analytics at Visier. We'll dig into the particulars of this Great Resignation, as well as work through potential solutions for employers and frontline managers. George, Ian, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here, Chris.
Ian, I'll start with you. Visier has some great data on the Great Resignation, kind of segmenting what's going on, why people are quitting, depending on kind of their demographic, their stage of their career. Can you walk us through some of that data and help us kind of make sense of that big 4.3 million stat?
Sure, for sure, Chris. So a little bit about Visier's background. We are the analytics engine for 8,000 different clients. We sort of help to elevate and automate that practice of putting people data in front of decision makers to understand how to run their business. And we've been at it for a long time. So what we sit on is a lot of employee records that are pulled directly from the HRIS, the core record keeping system. And we have aggregation rights to that. So we can look at resignation standardized in our world, so we know what that means. We can also break it down things like gender, age, tenure, a lot of the common properties that we would understand about employees. So back in February, along with our partner MZ Burning Glass, we were looking at resignation patterns. I knew from the 2007 recession how much talent mobility was happening. I was curious as to what's going to happen this time around. So we went to look, we saw upward trends, we saw increases in jobs, and so we said, watch out for summer of 2021. Now we're at that point, and we've measured the resignation rate every month since then, and we're at 25% actual exits. So this is people who have voluntarily left their business. 2019, which was already an elevated year, was 22%. So we know that it's, well, first of all, the age groups, the tenure ranges, the gender basis that people are moving on, and we saw some very interesting patterns in there. So, there's the intent to leave, and there's the actual leaves, and people are actually leaving.
Yeah. So this is a real thing. George, maybe I'll kick it to you. What has WorkTech been seeing kind of in your research and analyses?
Well, I spend my time both doing survey work and research, and then with the CHROs in the field, as well as with technology providers, and trying to come up with solutions here. And the pre-COVID, we saw a lot of what the market's talking about today around distributed work, wellness. We saw these things as trends both in the survey work and the research work. What I'm seeing right now, I just spent hours with about 30 CHROs last week, and the solution to this great resignation is, unfortunately, there are no silver bullets. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and the conversations that we're having are largely around learning, wellness and benefits, looking at getting access to more diverse talent, looking at pay, looking at communications and collaboration.
Yeah. So you mentioned the magic P word, pay. I'm sure a lot of people might think, well, let's just pay people more and they won't quit. They'll be happier with their jobs. That's what they're in it for. But bust that myth for us, because I'm sure all of us kind of understand that there's something more to it than pay. It's important, but it's not sufficient. So George, we'll stay with you. What's kind of the myth or misconceptions around the influence that pay has on people staying or leaving?
Well, I think pay does have an influence in the sense that the core contract that an employer has with their employees is to pay them fairly, to pay them on time, and to provide a suite of benefits or benefits options that work for the employee demographics in that company. But those are the table stakes. What's really driving the decision to stay or the decision to take a position tends to be around the value that is coming from the work. And that, the tricky part there is the value coming from the work is again, not one size fits all. It's not the same for everyone. And this isn't a generational issue. So the work that we did in the years up to the pandemic was showing that regardless of the stage of life for the employees, they were largely driven and would stay in a position or take a position for less pay if they were getting more value from their work.
Mm-hmm. And Ian, maybe you could talk a little bit around the research that you've seen with demographics, because I know there's an interesting kind of distinction between earlier career folks and people later in terms of the needs that they have, on top of feeling valued, purpose, things like that.
No, absolutely. And I think George says it well, but pay is something that's necessary to focus on, but it's actually a diminishing returns game. What can classically happen in pay is, first paycheck, it's like, great. Second paycheck, you've used it. Third paycheck, it's just normal. So it doesn't actually have that. The retention effect is very short-lived. We've been dealing with the healthcare sector where we have a lot of customers, and they've given up trying to compete on pay because when it's escalating at $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a month, they just can't compete. So pay is a component, but it's necessary, not sufficient. And what we saw in our data was this breakdown many people assumed that a lot of the resignation wave was driven purely from people on catch up. Like, I couldn't move during 2020, I'm going to catch up. And there is a portion that is that. There's the sort of 0 to 3 years of tenure, the 20 to 30 age group, the folks who are looking to build, understand, accelerate their careers. There's a portion of that. What surprised us when we continued to look at the data was the 10 to 15 year tenure. People who've built a career, established a way of work, doing things almost habitually, again, often 35 years plus, where the increases were also substantial. And this is what George is highlighting, and yourself, Chris, is that there is a group of people who are competent, capable, able to deliver, confident in their own results, that are choosing to engage with work differently. It may be there's work flexibility, it may be a change in career track, it may be a change to employer who actually represent their values more than they did. And that's different. That's this reset, reshuffle component that's going on, where people's choices about how they work have changed. And if employers are not paying attention to that, then we believe they're going to be missing out. They're not going to avoid the resignation. They're going to deepen their own challenges.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to quickly plug for the audience. If you have a question for Ian or George, please drop it, and we'll address it at the end during a brief Q&A. Ian, I wanted to stay with you on the idea of meeting people's expectations. What are some of the ways, either micro or macro, employers can help their employees feel like they're heard, they're listened to in terms of their values? Because values is a loaded word, and if people are bringing their authentic selves to work, how can they mesh or gel with their employer?
Yeah, and I would pivot that question to things that they value. One of our great examples is a client where using data, so listening plus sort of actual event data, what's happening and what does that mean for people. Putting those two things together, they were able to identify a shift pattern which didn't work for the women in their workforce. They noticed that women were leaving at a high rate. They went to understand why through surveys and asking. They understood that it's really hard for me to do what I need to do for my life and work and meet this shift. So instead of saying, oh, well, we'll just keep the shift and give up on that employee population, they changed the shift pattern. And the only reason it was there was because of habit. And so, using data to segment, I think one of your other presenters earlier was saying this, don't think of it as one thing, no silver bullets, as George said. Segment your population to early stage professionals, solid professionals, different stages of work that people value. Do I value flexibility? Do I value learning? Do I value, the chance to do cool, interesting projects? Build those segments in your population and then align ways to meet those needs. Because talking purely about values can get very difficult, because that's a really amorphous element within a population. If it's purely, what do you believe to be true? But if it's like, what do you value in your work relationship? How do we make a balance in that? How do we use data to understand the different segments? Then you start to be able to build a co-create. We think of it as co-creating a way forward as a business.
Yeah. George, that reminds me of something we were talking about earlier around wellness. So yes, you can't throw money at the problem, but it is helpful to offer more benefits than less, perhaps, in certain cases. And I think, wellness is one thing you're passionate about. Can you talk a little bit about just the value those kinds of investment bring over the long haul?
Yeah, I think there's been one of the resets here has been on wellness, well-being, and benefits. Every CEO that I talked to at the beginning of this crisis had a very similar story, where their first reaction, it was like muscle memory to look at the business and look at, where is the business, where are the economics of the business, and then quickly realized what we're actually in the middle of, and started thinking about their teams, started thinking about their staff. Do they have what they need? How are they coping? And as this has gone on, that's just increased over time. The ROI, the return on well-being and wellness has been, we've got so much research over decades about, productivity and engagement and just overall sentiment and retention in the workforce, but it never moved the needle like everyone in the company being, struggling with the same crisis at the same time. So now we've seen a huge uptick in the adoption of marketplaces and technology and services that bring everything from coaching and mentors to psychiatrists and interpersonal connections within the workforce in order to address this. And it's a really good thing. And I'm excited to see where that takes us as we hopefully emerge at some point from this crisis.
Right, because all of these initiatives were kind of slow going before COVID. Would you say that it's starting to accelerate, and do you think it'll continue, or do you think after things return to normal, if they ever do, maybe you take issue with that premise, that you'll see that kind of peter out? Are you optimistic about that?
I am optimistic about that. I think that most of these trends, distributed work, the workplace intelligence study that I did pre-COVID, that was one of the big headlines. Distributed work is the future. This was an international study with thousands of employees and over 1,000 employers. The need for more work-life balance and benefits to support it. This was all pre-COVID. These were things that we were dealing with. The need to access more diverse talent and become a more inclusive culture in the workforce. It all existed. And boy, has this accelerated everything. I think in many ways, while HR has been struggling with a lot of these concepts, I think the businesses overall were caught flat-footed because everything that we said was going to happen back in the 90s, the world would become more flat, talent would become more mobile, the knowledge economy would be the future. That's what we're watching happen right in front of us. Folks are crossing borders, folks are staying home, they're working from anywhere. And the frontline workers are just as important to this knowledge economy and to the knowledge workers as the other way around. It's a really it's a stressful time, but it's an exciting and interesting time to be in this space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ian, I have a feeling I know what your answer will be, but on the same page, other thoughts compared to George?
No, I mean our thoughts are this is how it's going to be going forward, and we aim to keep track of labor market dynamics and how the world of work is changing, and this notion of we'll just go back to our world where we all go to our cubby every day and that old normal is coming back. We're not of that view. It really is a sense of a lot of the underlying trends accelerated, the sort of habits are broken. We are here in a different world of work where the mix and who you put where and why and how that works is very different. And I think it's stressful because a lot of people are like, more change on top of change. I totally acknowledge the stress in that. I'm with George because I think it's a more exciting, people-centric view of the work going forward. And if we think about knowledge, knowledge comes from a person. For a person to work well, they have to be well. It's just like an athlete. And so why wouldn't a business be positive about helping people be healthy, be energized, be, committed to using their knowledge? It just makes sense. I think we're seeing, this really take hold. Again, I'm excited by it. I agree, it's a big change.
Mm. I want to double click on kind of the prescriptions for people. We've been rather macro in terms of the people at the top who organize the structures and the systems for things. I also want to give attention to the frontline leaders who talk to their employees day to day, are the ones doing all of that good active listening to make sure that their needs are being met. Any advice, George, we'll start with you, on kind of the really tactical things people can do or avoid doing, potholes to avoid, in the effort to meet people where they are based on kind of where they are in their career and the needs they have?
Yeah, I think we need to double down on investments or start investing in leadership and development. The frontline managers, really managers anywhere, right? We all knew that pre-pandemic, we could throw a blanket over managers and say, weren't that effective. In this environment, needing to have a conversation about how somebody's really doing or how they're coping, and understanding what their definition of value is or their career aspirations are, in order to frame a path for them moving forward, whether that's professionally or personally, are conversations that are very difficult for most managers, and we really need to develop the skills and the training to help them with that.
Mm-hmm. Ian, your thoughts?
Yeah, so simply put, it's not just listening, but it's listening and hearing. I mean, I think we see great responses from individuals and from teams when a change is identified. I'd like a different shift pattern. I'd like an easier way to get to work. I'd like to have choice about which days I come in, or flexibility on which days I need to be in the office, which days I don't, and then action taken against those. The biggest pain for an employee is I have these ideas about how to make things better. People ask me, but they never act. So a lot of what we're focusing on is understand, down at the team level, the little actions that can be taken to facilitate making work for people, enjoyable, rewarding, because that's what most people are looking for, and that's how you build retention from the ground up.
Mm-hmm. We're getting somewhat close to the end of our time. I wanted to make sure I gave the floor to each of you. I want to kind of sum up the kind of discussion we've been having so far into, if you could offer kind of one distilled piece of advice to employers or individual leaders at companies, what would it be? So Ian, I'll stay with you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. My one piece of advice is don't assume it's one thing. Don't segment your population in terms of who's most important to my business, and then work out multiple strategies for those populations in order to keep the people in your business that you need to keep. It needs to be a complex response because it's a complex problem.
Awesome. George?
Yeah, I would say that I would carry Ian's answer, just carry that further, that the listening and not the creepy kind of, espionage across your network, but listening to employees, asking your employees what they're looking for and what they need right now, both on a day-to-day basis as well as a long-term, career perspective or work perspective, and then creating an environment where they feel comfortable sharing that information. That's really important, and they'll tell you whether you've got a upskilling challenge or need to invest in reskilling the workforce, or whether you need to invest more on your wellness and benefits, or whether pay equity is off, or whether you need more tools to help with communication and collaboration, or whether you need to back off, whether they're getting a few too many surveys, and you need to listen to that and then craft the solution per segments the way Ian was mentioning it.
Yeah, I think everyone knows the pain of feedback fatigue, for sure. Well, both of you have given us a lot to think about in terms of the kind of macro and the micro solutions, and that it's not just pay, it's also, these are real people showing up to their jobs, and it's fulfilling for them, and it's up to managers to help make it even more so, so that they stay. George and Ian, thank you so much, and thank you to you for watching. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you again to all of our panelists and speakers. Today, we learned about the importance of innovation in HR and that prioritizing people is key. I hope you were inspired by these conversations. These discussions don't have to end here. Insider will continue to cover these topics in a variety of ways. The future of work depends on it. Please remember to share your thoughts using the hashtag InsiderEvents. In a few moments, our survey will pop up on your screen. We'd love to hear your feedback. The future of work might feel uncertain right now, but Insider's here to help. I'm Brandon T. Harden. Thanks for joining.